The colony of New Busan was quiet that morning. 4 million people lived their lives under a pale orange sky, going to work, eating breakfast, sending their children to school. It was the largest human settlement outside of Earth, built on a rocky world orbiting the star Kepler 442. The air smelled like iron and rain. People complained about the weather, about the food shipments being late, about the usual small problems of life on a frontier world. Nobody looked up at the sky and expected death. Mina was sitting in her office at the diplomatic center when the first alarm rang. She was 31 years old, with sharp eyes and a calm voice that made people trust her. She had spent 3 years on New Busan as a diplomatic envoy, handling trade agreements and minor disputes between colony districts. It was boring work, and she liked it that way. Boring meant safe. The alarm changed that. She pulled up the sensor feed on her display and saw them. Hundreds of ships, dropping out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the system. They were massive, dark, and shaped like the curved shells of beetles. Each one bristled with weapons. They moved in perfect formation, like insects swarming toward food. The Valthari Dominion had arrived. A single message came through on every frequency, translated into rough human language by some automatic system. The words were cold and simple. Submit or be erased. There was no greeting, no introduction, no explanation of who they were or what they wanted. Just 5 words and then silence. Mina tried to respond. She opened every communication channel she had, broadcasting on military, civilian, and emergency bands. She identified herself, offered to negotiate, asked for terms, asked for time. She followed every protocol she had ever learned. She spoke calmly, clearly, professionally. Nobody answered. 20 minutes later, the orbital stations around New Busan began to explode. The Valthari fleet opened fire without warning, without a second message, without any sign that they had even received Mina's transmissions. Bright lines of energy cut through the darkness of space and tore through metal and glass and flesh. Station 14, where 600 workers maintained the colony's communication relays, was gone in 3 seconds. Station 9, the medical hub, lasted 7 seconds longer. On the surface, people saw the sky light up with falling debris. Then the bombardment reached the ground. Lieutenant Tejo was aboard the patrol frigate Guangado, running a standard security sweep near the system's outer asteroid belt when the Valthari arrived. He was 28, tall and lean, with the kind of quiet confidence that came from years of training and very little actual combat. He had never fired a weapon at a living target. That changed in the next 60 seconds. 3 Valthari ships broke from the main fleet and moved toward his position. Tejo ordered evasive maneuvers, but the frigate was slow and old. The first hit knocked out their port engine. The second destroyed the weapons array. Tejo grabbed the communication console himself and sent a distress signal toward Earth, compressing every piece of sensor data he had into a single burst transmission. He sent it 3 times before the third hit crippled the ship completely. His crew pulled him from the wreckage of the bridge. He had burns on his arms and a piece of metal in his shoulder, but he was alive. Through the cracked viewport, he could see New Busan burning. 800,000 people died in the first 6 hours. The Valthari did not land troops. They did not occupy the colony. They simply burned it from orbit, section by section, with the mechanical patience of someone clearing weeds from a garden. Mina survived because she was underground when the bombardment hit her district. She crawled out of the ruins of the diplomatic center 12 hours later, covered in dust and blood that was not hers. She stood in the open air and looked at what was left of the city she had called home. Towers of black smoke rose into the orange sky. The ground was covered in ash. She could hear people screaming in the distance, but she could not see them. She did not cry. She did not speak. She simply stood there and memorized everything she saw, because she knew that someone would need to remember this. 47 light-years away, on Earth, Admiral Jisoo received Taeho's distress signal. Jisoo was 56 years old, a veteran of the first contact skirmish 15 years earlier, when a Velthari scout ship had entered human space and been driven off by a patrol fleet. That incident had been classified. The public never knew. Jisoo had argued then that humanity needed to prepare for the possibility of a hostile alien civilization. She had been told that the threat was exaggerated, that resources were better spent on colonization, that war was unlikely. She read Taeho's data 3 times. She watched the sensor recordings of the Velthari fleet, counted their ships, studied their weapons signatures. Then she walked into the United Earth Council chamber and played the recordings on the main screen, without saying a word. 12 council members stared at the images of New Busan burning. Some of them turned pale. One of them put a hand over her mouth. The Secretary General leaned forward in his chair and asked, very quietly, what they were looking at. Jisoo told them. She told them about the Velthari, about their history of conquering and destroying other species, about the size and power of their fleet. She told them about the 800,000 dead on New Busan. She told them that this was not a raid, or a mistake, or a misunderstanding. This was the beginning of an extermination. The Secretary General asked what she recommended. Jisoo looked at him with steady eyes. They did not ask who we are, she said. They will learn. The United Earth Council authorized full wartime mobilization within the hour. It was the first time in over a century that the entire planet had united for a single purpose. Factories that built civilian ships were converted to produce warships. Research labs that studied alien biology were tasked with finding weaknesses. Every man and woman who had ever worn a military uniform was recalled to service. On a deep space patrol route far from Earth, Captain Yuna received her orders. She was 34, with dark eyes and a reputation for being impossible to rattle. She read the briefing about New Busan in silence. She watched the footage of the bombardment. Her face did not change. Her hands did not shake. She set down the datapad and looked at the stars through her viewport. Somewhere out there, the Velthari were celebrating another easy conquest. Set course for Earth, she said. We have work to do. 3 months passed, and the Velthari pushed deeper into human space. They captured 2 more colony worlds with barely any resistance. The colonies were small, only a few 100,000 people each, and the local defense forces were too weak to stop a fleet that size. The Velthari burned what they wanted to burn, took what they wanted to take, and moved on. Overlord Dren, the supreme commander of the Velthari invasion force, sent a report to the Dominion High Council from the bridge of his flagship, the Silence. His tone was bored. He described the human species as primitive, disorganized, and barely worth the ammunition. He estimated the campaign would be finished within 1 solar cycle. The council was pleased. This was routine for them. They had done this 11 times before, to 11 different species. None of those species existed anymore. Dren did not know that everything he believed about humanity was wrong. On Earth, Captain Yuna had taken command of the Iron Lotus, the most advanced warship in the United Earth Navy. It was fast, heavily armed, and built with technology that had been experimental 6 months ago. War had a way of making experimental things very practical very quickly. Her second-in-command was Lieutenant Taeho, now recovered from his injuries at New Busan. He walked with a slight limp from the metal that had been pulled from his shoulder, and he carried something new in his eyes. It was not fear, it was patience. The kind of patience that a man develops when he has already decided exactly what he is going to do, and is simply waiting for the right moment. Deep inside the Iron Lotus, in a laboratory filled with alien wreckage and human determination, Dr. Hanuel was performing miracles. Hanuel was 36, small and thin, with messy hair and hands that were always stained with chemical residue. She had not slept more than 4 hours a night since the war began. Her team had recovered pieces of destroyed Velthari ships from the wreckage at New Busan and from the 2 other fallen colonies. While most species took centuries to understand Velthari shield technology, Hanul's team cracked the basic principles in 11 weeks. When asked how this was possible, Hanul shrugged and said, "We are very motivated." She presented her findings to Admiral Jisoo in a secure briefing room on Earth. The Velthari shields operated on a specific harmonic frequency. If you could match that frequency and send a pulse at the right angle, the shields would weaken by nearly 60%. It was not a perfect solution, but it turned an invincible enemy into a vulnerable one. Jisoo smiled for the first time in 3 months. The Admiral unveiled her strategy to the War Council. She called it Operation Tidal Wave. Humanity would not try to hold a defensive line against the Velthari. The enemy was too numerous and too powerful for that. Instead, they would let the Velthari advance, stretch their supply lines thin, and then strike behind them, cut the head from the body, starve the beast. While the fleet prepared, Sergeant Dowon was building something terrifying on the ground. Dowon was 41, built like a wall, with a voice that could make grown soldiers flinch. He had been a special forces instructor before the war, training soldiers in the hardest conditions Earth could offer. Now he was training a new kind of soldier. They called them Reapers. The Reapers wore exosuits that let them fight in zero-gravity, toxic atmospheres, and the tight corridors of enemy ships. The Velthari were physically larger and stronger than humans. Their claws could tear through standard body armor. In a fair fight, a human would lose. But Dowon did not believe in fair fights. He taught his soldiers to use explosives in enclosed spaces, to hack alien door systems, to set traps with monofilament wire, to fight dirty and fight smart. He told them that honor was for peacetime. In war, the only thing that mattered was making sure the enemy was more afraid of you than you were of them. Taeho brought something valuable from the front lines. He had spent weeks studying Velthari battle patterns from the data he collected before his ship was destroyed. He noticed something important. The Velthari did not adapt during battle. They followed strict formations, strict protocols, strict doctrines that had been developed over thousands of years. If something unexpected happened, they did not improvise. They simply applied more force in the same pattern. Humans were different. Humans changed plans in the middle of a fight. Humans lied, bluffed, retreated, and came back from unexpected angles. Humans were messy and chaotic and unpredictable. And in war, that was a weapon. The first real counterattack came at Sigma Outpost, a small relay station at the edge of Velthari-occupied territory. A young pilot named Suho led a fighter wing of 12 ships into the asteroid field surrounding the outpost. Suho was 23, barely old enough to shave, with reflexes that his instructors said were the best they had ever seen. He led the Velthari patrol ships into the asteroid field, weaving between rocks at speeds that should have been impossible. The Velthari followed, maintaining their perfect formation. Suho counted on that. He had mapped every asteroid in the field before the mission. He knew exactly where the gaps were and where the dead ends were. He led 14 Velthari warships into a dead end. Then his wing doubled back and hit them from behind, while mines hidden on the asteroids detonated around them. 14 ships. The Velthari had never lost more than 2 in a single battle against any species in their entire history. The news spread through the Dominion fleet like a disease. Sub-Commander Valak, Overlord Dren's chief strategist, began to worry. He was not like Dren. He was curious and careful, and he believed in understanding his enemies. He accessed the Dominion's database on humanity and began reading their history. What he found disturbed him deeply. Humans had spent most of their existence fighting each other. They had invented every tactic the Dominion used independently thousands of years ago. Ambush, siege, blockade, scorched earth, guerrilla warfare, psychological operations, weapons of mass destruction. They had done it all, to themselves, over and over again, for millennia. And somehow they had survived. Somehow they had climbed out of the ashes every single time and built something new. The 11 species the Dominion had destroyed before had been peaceful. They had built civilizations based on cooperation and harmony. When the Velthari came, they did not know how to fight. They tried to negotiate, then they tried to run, then they died. Humans were not like them. Valak went to Dren's command chamber and stood before the Overlord with his findings displayed on a datapad. "They are not prey," he said. "They are predators who are sleeping. We'd have woken them up." Dren looked at him with cold, insectoid eyes. "They are animals," he said. "We will crush them as we have crushed all the others." Valak left the chamber in silence. He did not argue, but he began making his own plans, because he was now certain of something that Dren refused to see. The Velthari had made a mistake, and mistakes against humans were not forgiven. 6 months into the war, humanity stopped running. For the first time since the burning of New Busan, a human fleet crossed the invisible line between human space and Velthari-occupied territory. Captain Yuna stood at the center of the Iron Lotus Bridge, her hands clasped behind her back, watching the stars shift as the fleet dropped out of faster-than-light travel. Their target was Relay Station Omnith, a massive structure floating in the void between two star systems. Omnith was the nerve center of Velthari communications across 3 entire sectors. Every order from Overlord Dren, every supply request, every fleet movement passed through Omnith. If it fell, the Velthari would lose their ability to coordinate a quarter of their invasion force. Yuna had brought 37 ships. The Velthari garrison at Omnith had 112. The numbers were not in her favor. But numbers had stopped mattering 3 months ago at Sigma Outpost, when Suho and 12 fighters had destroyed 14 Velthari warships in an asteroid field. Mina stood beside Yuna on the bridge. She was not the same woman who had crawled out of the ruins of New Busan. That woman had believed in diplomacy, in talking, in finding common ground. This woman still believed in those things, but she had added something new to her beliefs. She now understood that some people only listened when you were holding a weapon. It was Mina who suggested sending a message before the attack. Not a plea for peace, not a negotiation, a declaration. Yuna agreed. The message was broadcast on every Velthari frequency, translated into their language by Dr. Hanul's linguistic team. Yuna's voice was calm and flat, like she was reading a weather report. "You came to our worlds without warning," she said. "You killed our people without mercy. We gave you the chance to be civilized. You chose to be monsters. Now we choose to be worse." The Velthari garrison at Omnith scrambled to respond. 112 ships arranged themselves in their standard defensive formation, a tight sphere around the relay station with overlapping fields of fire. It was the same formation they had used successfully against 6 different species over the last 8,000 years. It was perfect, according to their doctrine. Yuna tore it apart. She split her 37 ships into 5 groups. 3 groups attacked from different angles, forcing the Velthari sphere to stretch and thin. The 4th group, led by Suho's fighter wing, dove straight through the gaps in the formation, hitting the inner ships that expected to be protected. The 5th group did something the Velthari had never seen before. They shut down their engines, went dark, and drifted through the battlefield like dead hulks. When the Velthari sensors dismissed them as debris, they powered up at point-blank range and fired everything they had. It was chaos. Beautiful, terrible, human chaos. The Velthari tried to reform their sphere, but every time they adjusted, Yuna changed the attack pattern. She gave her captains freedom to improvise, to take opportunities as they saw them, to be creative. The Velthari commanders waited for orders from their senior officers. Yuna's commanders did not wait for anything. While the space battle raged, Sergeant Dowan launched the second phase. Boarding torpedoes, each carrying a squad of Reapers, slammed into the hulls of 3 Velthari command carriers. The torpedoes punched through armor plating and deposited human soldiers directly into the corridors of enemy ships. What followed was something the Velthari had never experienced. No species had ever boarded a Dominion warship and survived. The corridors were dark, filled with toxic atmosphere, and designed for creatures with 6 limbs and natural armor. For any other species, it would have been a death trap. The Reapers had trained for exactly this. Their exosuits filtered the air. Their helmet displays showed them in the dark. They moved in pairs, covering each other, clearing rooms with grenades and automatic weapons. When a Velthari warrior charged at them with claws extended, the Reapers did not try to match its strength. They tripped it with monofilament wire, pinned it with magnetic clamps, and moved on. Dowan led the assault on the largest carrier personally. He was the first through the breach, his heavy exosuit scarred and dented from a dozen previous training exercises. He fought his way to the ship's command center in 47 minutes, leaving a trail of broken Velthari behind him. When he kicked open the door to the bridge, the Velthari captain inside stared at him with an expression that Dowan would later describe as pure disbelief. "You are inside my ship," the captain said through its translator. "Yes," Dowan said, "and now it is my ship." Omnith fell in 9 hours. The Velthari lost 86 of their 112 ships. Humanity lost 11. The relay station was captured intact, and Hanel's team immediately began downloading every piece of data they could find. The effect was immediate. 3 entire sectors of Velthari operations went dark. Ships that had been advancing into human space suddenly stopped receiving orders. Supply convoys did not know where to go. Patrol routes became confused. The perfectly organized machine of the Velthari invasion began to stutter and cough. On the Dominion homeworld, the High Council received the news with something close to panic. They had ruled this region of the galaxy for 12,000 years. They had never lost a relay station. They had never had their ships boarded. They had never faced an enemy that fought like this, that adapted this fast, that seemed to get stronger every time they were hit. Overlord Dren responded with rage. He demanded that the High Council authorize the deployment of the Extinction Fleet, a force of 4,000 warships that had been held in reserve for only the most extreme situations. It was the weapon they used when they wanted to erase a species completely, to burn their worlds and salt the ground so nothing would ever grow again. It had been deployed 3 times in 12,000 years. Each time, a civilization had ceased to exist. The High Council authorized it. Subcommander Valak watched the authorization go through from his station on the Silence. He had spent the last 3 months studying humanity. He had read their literature, their history, their military records. He had found accounts of something humans called total war, where entire civilizations threw everything they had into a single conflict. Factories, farms, schools, hospitals, everything converted to the war effort. Every man, woman, and child becoming part of the machine. He had also found something else. Humans had a phrase that no other species in the Dominion's records had ever produced. The phrase was simple, and it terrified him. "We will fight them on the beaches." It was not the words that scared him. It was the context. A small island nation outnumbered and outgunned, facing the most powerful military force on their planet. And instead of surrendering, Their leader had stood up and promised to fight everywhere, in every street, on every hill, and never, ever give up. They had won that war. Meanwhile, Dr. Haenel made her greatest breakthrough yet. Using data captured from Omnith, combined with her own research, she cracked the principles behind Velthari faster-than-light inhibitors. These devices allowed the Velthari to trap enemy fleets in place, preventing them from escaping. It was their most powerful strategic tool. Hanawil built a countermeasure in 6 weeks. When she told Yuna, the captain allowed herself a rare, thin smile. "Now they cannot trap us," she said, "and they cannot run from us." Back on Earth, Admiral Jisoo received intelligence reports about the extinction fleet being assembled. 4,000 warships. The largest force the Dominion had ever sent against a single enemy. It was meant to terrify. It was meant to signal the end. Jisoo read the report at her desk, alone, in the quiet hours of the night. She set the datapad down and looked at the photograph on her wall. It showed New Busan before the attack. A city full of light and life, under an orange sky. She picked up her communicator and called Yuna. "They are bringing everything," she said. There was a pause. Then Yuna's voice came through, calm as always. "Good." Jisoo smiled. It was not a kind smile. "Come home, Captain. We have a war to finish." The extinction fleet arrived at the edge of the Sol system on a Tuesday. 4,000 Velthari warships dropped out of faster-than-light travel in a wave that lit up every sensor array from Mars to Pluto. They spread across the darkness like a wall of black metal, each ship larger than a city, each one carrying enough firepower to burn a continent. It was the single largest military force ever assembled against one species in the recorded history of the galaxy. Overlord Dren stood on the bridge of the silence and looked at the yellow star in the distance. Earth's sun, such a small, ordinary star for such an annoying species. He had brought everything, every warship, every carrier, every bomber the Dominion could spare. He intended to end this today. He would burn Earth the way he had burned New Busan, and then he would hunt down every surviving human in every corner of the galaxy until there were none left. He gave the order to advance. Admiral Jisoo watched the Velthari fleet on the main display of Earth's orbital command station. 600 human warships were arranged in a layered defense around Earth. Behind them, the orbital defense grid, 3 rings of weapons platforms and shield generators that circled the planet, powered up with a low hum that could be felt in the bones. Every ship, every station, every satellite was armed and ready. 600 against 4,000. The numbers were terrible. Jisoo had known they would be. She had planned for it anyway. The first wave hit like a hammer. The Velthari advanced in their standard attack formation, a massive wedge of ships that concentrated firepower on a single point. They struck the outer defense line near the orbit of Mars, and the effect was devastating. Human ships that tried to hold position were torn apart by overlapping fire. The outer defense line buckled, then broke. In the first 3 hours, humanity lost 240 ships. 40% of the outer fleet, gone. On the Iron Lotus, Captain Yuna held the center line. Her ship shook with every near miss, and the damage reports came in faster than Taeho could read them. 3 decks had been sealed due to hull breaches. The port weapons array was operating at half power. 2 of their escort frigates were debris. Taeho looked at the tactical display and saw the numbers. He knew what they meant. "Captain," he said, his voice steady despite everything, "the outer line has fallen. We are exposed." Yuna did not look away from the viewport. "Hold position," she said. "Captain, if we hold position, we will be surrounded within the hour." "Then we will be surrounded. Hold position." Taeho did not argue. He had served with Yuna long enough to know that she did not make decisions based on fear. She made decisions based on what needed to happen next. And right now, what needed to happen was for the Velthari to believe they were winning, because they were not. Suho's fighter wing launched from the Iron Lotus hangar bay at full speed. 60 fighters, small and fast, diving straight into the advancing Velthari formation. Suho's orders were simple and insane. Break the enemy's advance column. Buy time. He led his wing into the gap between two Velthari battlecruisers, so close that their shields scraped against the alien hull. His fighters released electromagnetic pulse charges that scrambled the Velthari targeting systems, then pulled away before the enemy could react. The advance column stuttered, confused, ships bumping into each other as their sensors went blind. It bought 30 minutes. In those 30 minutes, Dohan launched 200 boarding torpedoes. The Reapers hit the Velthari fleet like a disease. 200 torpedoes, each carrying a squad of armored soldiers, punched into the hulls of Velthari warships across the formation. The fighting inside was brutal. Corridors filled with smoke and screaming, humans and Velthari killing each other in the dark. In rooms so tight that there was no room to dodge, no room to retreat, only room to fight. Dohan was on one of those ships. He led his squad through the engineering section of a Velthari heavy cruiser, planting charges on the reactor coolant lines. A Velthari warrior twice his size slammed into him from a side corridor, cracking his exosuit's chestplate and sending him into a wall. Dohan hit the wall, bounced off, pulled his sidearm, and shot the warrior 3 times in the joint between its head and thorax. It fell. He kept moving. "Charges set," he reported over the radio. "Pulling out." 30 seconds later, the heavy cruiser's reactor went critical. The explosion took out 2 more Velthari ships that were flying too close. But the Velthari kept coming. 4,000 ships was simply too many. For every ship the humans destroyed, 3 more took its place. The second defense line began to crack. Earth's orbital platforms fired everything they had, filling space with a wall of energy and metal. But the Velthari absorbed the punishment and pushed through. They were getting closer to Earth, closer to winning. Yuna watched the tactical display and saw the moment approaching. The Velthari fleet was fully committed now, shields raised, weapons hot. Every ship in the formation locked into the attack. They were so focused on breaking through to Earth that they had stopped paying attention to anything else. She opened a channel to Dr. Hainul, who was in the deepest section of the Iron Lotus, in a laboratory that had been sealed and reinforced with triple armor plating. "Hainul," Yuna said, "is it ready?" Hainul's voice came back, tight with exhaustion and excitement. "It is ready. Fire." Project Hammer was the result of 6 months of work, built from reverse-engineered Velthari shield technology and human nuclear pulse engineering. It was a weapon that sent a cascading energy wave through the harmonic frequency that connected Velthari shield generators. When one shield overloaded, it sent the surge to the next ship, and the next, like dominoes falling in a line. A single pulse of energy, invisible to the naked eye, expanding outward from the Iron Lotus at the speed of light. 1,200 Velthari ships lost their shields at the same moment. The effect was immediate and catastrophic. Ships that had been protected by layers of energy barriers were suddenly naked, exposed to every weapon aimed at them. The orbital defense platforms, which had been hitting shields with no effect, were suddenly tearing through their hull. Human warships that had been retreating turned and charged, pouring fire into unprotected targets. The Velthari formation shattered. Ships that had been flying in perfect order suddenly scattered, trying to get away from the cascade. Some collided with each other. Some tried to raise emergency shields and failed. Some simply exploded as human weapons found their reactors. Dren watched from the Bridge of the Silence as his fleet came apart. In 12,000 years of Dominion warfare, no enemy had ever broken a Velthari formation. No enemy had ever made them run. His officers were shouting, Alarms were ringing, and for the first time in his life, Dren did not know what to do. Valak appeared beside him. "Overlord, we must retreat. The fleet is breaking apart. If we stay, we lose everything." Dren turned to him with fury in his eyes. "The Dominion does not retreat." "Then the Dominion dies here," Valak said. Before Dren could respond, the ship shook violently. Alarms screamed. A damage report came in. Human boarding teams had breached the lower decks of the Silence. Dohan's Reapers had found the flagship. The fighting inside the Silence was the worst of the entire battle. The ship was enormous, and Dren's personal guard were the best warriors in the Dominion. But the Reapers had been fighting inside Velthari ships for months now. They knew the layouts, the weak points, the blind corners where an ambush could be set. They pushed through deck by deck, room by room, leaving nothing behind them. Dren died on his own bridge. The official reports would say he fell in combat. The truth was simpler. He refused to leave, refused to surrender, and the Reapers did not give him a third option. Valak, who had already moved to a secondary command center, felt the moment Dren died through the sudden silence on the command frequency. He did not hesitate. He took command of what was left of the fleet and gave an order that had not been spoken in the Velthari language for over 6,000 years. Retreat. Full retreat. All ships. The Extinction Fleet, the most powerful force in the galaxy, turned and ran from Earth. Mina was on the Iron Lotus Bridge when Teho intercepted the Velthari retreat signal. He translated it and read it aloud. There was a word in the transmission that had no direct human translation. The closest meaning was something like, "The prey has teeth." Yuna listened to the translation. She looked out the viewport at the retreating Velthari fleet, at the debris field that filled the space between Earth and Mars, at the burning remains of ships from both sides. "We are not prey," she said quietly. Jisu's voice came over the command channel, heard by every ship in the human fleet. 2 words. Pursue them. 1 year after the burning of New Busan, the human fleet arrived at the edge of Dominion core space. No enemy had ever reached this far. In 12,000 years, no species had survived long enough to see the stars that surrounded the Velthari homeworld. The space here was thick with defense stations, sensor networks, and patrol fleets that had grown lazy from having nothing to do. They were built to stop invasions that never came, to guard a border that no one had ever threatened. Until now. Captain Yuna stood on the bridge of the Iron Lotus and looked at the stars ahead. The fleet behind her was not the same fleet that had defended Earth 3 months ago. It was larger, stronger, rebuilt with captured Velthari technology welded onto human engineering. Ships that had been damaged at the Battle of Sol had been repaired with alien armor plating. Weapons that had been experimental were now standard. The fleet carried the scars of war and the hunger of a species that had been pushed to the edge and pushed back. Across the Dominion, everything was falling apart. 12 vassal species, civilizations that had been conquered and enslaved by the Velthari centuries ago, saw the Extinction Fleet retreat from Earth and understood what it meant. The Masters could bleed. The Masters could lose. Revolts broke out on 40 worlds within a week. Supply lines were cut. Garrisons were overwhelmed. The empire that had stood for 12,000 years was cracking from the inside. Sub-Commander Valak, now acting overlord after Dren's death, sat alone in his command chamber on the Velthari homeworld and studied the reports. He was not a fool. He could see the numbers. The fleet was broken. The vassal species were rising. There was no combination of tactics or reinforcements that could change what was about to happen. He opened a communication channel to the Iron Lotus. Yuna accepted the call. Valak's image appeared on her main screen. He was tall for a Velthari, with dark green carapace and eyes that held something Yuna had not seen in any Velthari before. Weariness. Not the weariness of a body, but of a mind that had been forced to accept an impossible truth. "Captain Yuna," Valak said, "I wish to discuss terms." Yuna said nothing. She waited. Valak laid out his offer: a full ceasefire, immediate withdrawal from all occupied human worlds, the return of all human prisoners, financial reparations to be paid over a century. In exchange, the human fleet would stop its advance and return to its own space. It was a generous offer. It was more than any species had ever gotten from the Dominion. It was, by any reasonable measure, a victory. Mina, standing at Yuna's side, leaned close and spoke quietly. "This is everything we asked for at the beginning," she said. "Before the war. This is what I tried to negotiate for at New Busan. We can end this here." Yuna looked at her. Mina's face was calm, but her eyes were tired. She had been through too much. They all had. A year of war, of death, of watching good people burn. The easy thing would be to accept, to stop, to go home and try to forget. Yuna turned back to Valak's image on the screen. She was silent for a long time. The bridge crew watched her. Teho watched her. Mina watched her. Even Valak, across the void of space, waited with something that looked very much like hope. Then Yuna spoke. 12 months ago, you came to our home. You burned New Busan. You killed 800,000 people who had done nothing to you. Men, women, children. You did not warn them. You did not negotiate. You simply decided they did not matter. Her voice was steady, not angry, not cold, just clear like water running over stone. We sent diplomats. You ignored them. We asked for peace. You laughed. You thought we were weak because we wanted to talk before we fought. She paused. You were wrong. Valak's eyes shifted. His mandibles clicked together, a Veltharl sign of distress. You started this war. You chose violence when we offered words. And now, after everything you have taken from us, you want mercy. Another pause, longer this time. Here is my answer. We are coming, not to conquer. We are not like you. We are coming to make sure you never do this again, to anyone. She leaned forward, and for the first time, something burned behind her dark eyes. Not rage, something deeper. Something that had been forged in the fires of New Busan and tempered in the blood of the Battle of Seoul. It was the look of someone who had seen the worst thing in the universe and decided to make sure it never happened again. You started this war. Now you will face Earth. The transmission ended. Valak stared at the blank screen. His hands trembled. In his entire life, through decades of military service and hundreds of campaigns, he had never been afraid. He was afraid now. The Battle of the Dominion Threshold began at dawn by Earth's Standard Time. Yuna did not order a bombardment. She did not glass cities or burn fields. She was not the Velthari. Instead, her fleet moved with surgical precision, targeting military installations and nothing else. Shipyards that had built warships for thousands of years were disabled, their power cores shut down by electronic warfare pulses designed by Dr. Haenel. Weapons depots were surrounded, and their garrisons given the choice to surrender or fight. Fleet command stations were boarded by Dohan's Reapers, who moved through them with the terrifying efficiency of soldiers who had done this many times before. Suho flew escort over the Velthari capital city, his fighter cutting through the alien sky at low altitude. His weapons were armed, his targeting systems locked onto a dozen military installations below. But his orders were clear, given by Yuna herself before the battle began. Do not fire on civilian targets. Do not fire on anyone who is not shooting at you. We are here to end a war, not start a massacre. Suho followed those orders. Below him, Velthari civilians looked up at the human fighter streaking across their sky and felt something that their species had not experienced in 12,000 years. Vulnerability. Dohan led a battalion of Reapers onto the surface of the homeworld. They landed outside the hall of the High Council, a massive building of black stone that had stood for 9,000 years. The Velthari guards at the entrance raised their weapons. Dovan raised his hand. "You can fight," he said through his suit's translator, "and you will die. Or you can put down your weapons, and everyone goes home. Choose." The guards looked at him. They looked at the 200 armored humans standing behind him. They looked at the sky, where human warships hung like dark clouds over their city. They put down their weapons. The High Council was taken into custody without a single shot fired on the ground. Dohan walked through the halls of the most powerful building in the galaxy, with his helmet under his arm, his scarred face visible for all to see. He wanted them to see a human face. He wanted them to remember it. Haenel activated her signal jammers from orbit. A cascading wave of interference spread across the Dominion's military network, shutting down communications between warships, bases, and command centers across the entire empire. The Velthari war machine, already broken, went completely silent. Valak surrendered 3 hours later. He walked out of his command center, unarmed and alone, and he handed his rank insignia to the first human soldier he saw. The soldier was a private, 19 years old, who had never been off Earth before this deployment. She took the insignia with shaking hands and said, "Thank you, sir." Valak looked at her for a long moment. "You are very young," he said. "Yes, sir," she said. "Your species is very young," he said. "Yes, sir. And yet here you are." She did not know what to say to that, so she said nothing. Valak nodded slowly and allowed himself to be led away. In the weeks that followed, Mina stepped into the role she had been born for. She led the negotiations for the Sol Accords, a treaty that would reshape the galaxy. The Dominion's military empire was dissolved. The Velthari were permitted to keep their homeworld and their culture, but their war fleet was reduced to a defensive force, and they were forbidden from conquering anyone ever again. An interstellar council was established, with representatives from every freed species and from Earth, to ensure that what the Dominion had done could never be done again. Mina signed the treaty with steady hands. She thought about the day she had crawled out of the ruins of the diplomatic center on New Busan, covered in dust and ash. She had memorized everything she saw that day. Now she was making sure it meant something. On the last day before the fleet departed for home, Yuna stood on the bridge of the Iron Lotus. The Velthari homeworld hung in the viewport, a pale blue sphere under a white sun. It was beautiful. She had not expected that. He stood there in silence for a while, looking at the same view. "Do you think they understand now?" he asked. Yuna thought about it. She thought about New Busan. She thought about the Battle of Sol. She thought about the look on Valak's face when the transmission ended. She thought about the Velthari guards who put down their weapons, and the young private who accepted a surrender she never expected. "No," Yuna said, "but they will. We will make sure of it." She turned from the viewport and walked to her command chair. "Set course for Earth," she said. "We are going home." The Iron Lotus turned, and the fleet turned with it. 600 ships moving together through the stars. Behind them, the Velthari homeworld grew small and distant. Ahead of them, somewhere in the dark, Earth waited. Across the galaxy, in the halls and homes and hiding places of a dozen freed civilizations, beings who had lived under the Dominion's shadow for centuries whispered a new phrase to each other. It spread from world to world, from species to species, carried by traders and refugees and freed prisoners who had seen what happened when humans went to war. The phrase was simple. It needed no translation. Do not wake the humans.